Hi everybody. I just wanted to show you examples of a gable and a hip roof. So I'm in my neighborhood and I'm looking at this house, and if you look at the garage door is open there. If you look at the garage, you could see clearly the gabled roof line, because they're kind of like two rectangles that are leaning toward each other to create that ridge line on the top. And then on their main house, you can see there's another gable. Ignore the part above the door right now, but you can see the other gabled area on the main house. And then above the door is a third gabled area. So this is a good example of a purely gabled house. Alright, I'm going to turn it off and go to another house. Okay, here is another neighbor's house, and this is an example of a hip roof. And you can see that all of the roof is slanted inward. It's not like two pieces that come together. All of it is slanted inward, meeting at the top there. So, and actually, their garage might be gabled. I can't tell from the front. I might walk around, but I wanted to show you a hip roof. Okay, here I am on the other side of their house, and it is hipped also. So this is a good example of a house with all hip roofs. And you can see, how all of every wall of the house has a slanted roof line above it. So this is a hip roof. And next door is the same one I showed you before, is gable. So there's two, excuse the branches here. There are the two examples of the roofs that you have to do. Alright, I'm going to take it inside. Okay guys, here we are. And you'll notice that I had to tape my paper sideways for this because now this is wider with the overhang and stuff. And for me, on my paper, it wasn't wide enough to have the paper vertical. So I have a horizontal paper, and I just started with the bottom line. And I went 8 feet by my scale from the bottom. I just made 1 point and then use my triangles to make sure that I stayed perpendicular. Because it sounds really persnickety, but the more precise you are when you start this, I think the nicer it's going to look when it's all done. So anyway, I made sure that using my triangle, that I was, perpendicular to this edge or parallel to this edge, and I gave myself my 40-foot bottom. What I haven't done yet, and you'll see it on the next segment, I'm going to do this in parts, is I haven't done the 6-inch mark for the ground. He said that we needed a little 6-inch line in here for the ground line, and I'll do that because this is just a start. But anyway, so mine is a 40-foot square house, so I measure my 40 feet, and we're supposed to go 9 feet up. So using the triangle, after I started that line, I gave myself perpendicular lines on both sides here, and then use this to get 9 feet up on each side. And as I did that, I also marked 2 feet down because this is our window line. So at the same time, I measured the 9 and I measured the 7 on both of these and connected both really lightly. And you'll notice on the window line, I went over because I knew that eventually the roof was going to intersect with that line, and that was going to be, and I needed that to happen. So I just went a little bit long on both sides. And I'll erase, all the parts where I went too far, I'll erase all that. But anyway, so the 40 feet, the 9, the 7, connected the 9, connected the 7, went over a little bit. Then I had to draw the center line right here. And that center line, of course, I just did the middle of my house, so it's 20 feet from either end. And I just drew a light line all the way up, way too far, as you can see. But anyway, so I drew that line, and this is where the 8 to 12, where the pitch of the roof comes into play. This is the one time when you really need to be careful and use it, because at this point all I have is this bottom part and the center. I didn't have any of this stuff up here drawn. So this is the next step right here, is you had to keep the pitch of the roof in mind, and Mr. Beers told everyone to use an 8-12 pitch. So if you remember from what we were talking about, that's rise over run, or the slope of this line. So actually, it's easier to measure your pitch, your run first. So go 12 up here on the top of this rectangle that you've already drawn. You have to go 12 feet in on both sides, and then 8 feet up on both sides. And then I just darkened it, made a little point at the end of it, just so that it was easier for me to connect. And I'll tell you, the first time I did it, when I drew this line, and it was fine. And then when I drew this side, my tips did not come together. And that was just poor measurement on my part. Like my 8, I don't remember which side it was. On one of these two sides, my 8 was bad. And so it was probably just a smidge over, but just the lightest bit over, and you're not going to come together in the middle. So I just erased it and did it again, and was really careful to do the 8-12, to get properly. And then sure enough, when I did that, so here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So like for instance, here's my scale, drew my 12, started myself with a perpendicular line off of the 12, then I took this again and I did my 8, and then I just darkened that, and then from the corner of the house to that point I went ahead and I drew my roof on both sides. I did it, and then the second time I did it, my points came together nicely, so I knew I did it right. So that's the inside, the hypotenuse. That's the inside slanted part, but that's not the roof line, because we still, if you remember, we needed this board right here, this 12-inch board. If you need to get a 12-inch or a 1-foot board, you have to measure 12 inches from here and do it again. Do your second hypotenuse, your second slanted line. And here, you have to be careful again, because if you're measuring, if this is a piece of board, imagine that this is a piece of wood, and you want to get the width of that wood, and it has to be 12 inches, you're talking about a perpendicular distance, you're talking about a measurement that's 12 inches from here to here, perpendicular to this edge, if you know what I'm saying. Because you need 12 inches straight. I don't want 12 inches that way, or it has to be 12 inches perfectly going at a right angle from the edge. So that's what these two lines are. I just gave myself 12 inches, I just gave myself a perpendicular line here, perpendicular line there, there, and there. So you need 2 on each side. And then went back to this and measured a foot on each of those. So I just lined up on this line. I just wanted a foot worth of it. So I just went from my 0 to 1, put a point, 0 to 1, put a point, and connected it again. And this time, this part has to intersect with my 7-foot line. So this one I just drew, I drew long, and sure enough, it also has to intersect with my center line. So when I did the 12 and the 12, I just made sure I stopped at the center line. I stopped close to the 7-foot line. Did that on both sides, and sure enough, it's all starting to come together. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to cut off the tip of this, because again, you have to picture, this has to be straight, because this is where your gutters are going to be nailed to a piece of wood right here. And that wood is an 8-inch piece of wood. It's a 2x8. So this has to be an 8-inch thing. And then I'll, when I come back on this, when I turn off the camera and fix this, I'm going to erase this little tip right there, because it wouldn't be a tip. So this was the weirdest, not the weirdest, this was the hardest part, because you had to get 8 inches, which is not easy with these scales. These scales really work in feet pretty much. So you'll be looking at your 1/8 scale, which is right here. Just kind of rough it. Give your, it's going to be not quite in the middle of the 6 and the 12, because that would, of course, would be 9, but close to the middle between the 6 and the 12. And what I did was I just did it on a little index card. I gave myself a 0, and then using my scale, which is 3/16, I found what I thought was roughly 8 inches on that little section right there, and gave myself a line. And then I marked it like this, so that these two lines are about 8 inches apart. And then taking this is easier to use than to try to find 8 inches on this all the time. So then I just took this card, and I just kept going, down my triangle tip here until I found where I was 8 inches apart, where this where the slanted section and the flat section were about 8 inches apart, which is right about there. And I just drew my 8 inches on both sides. And that's it for now. I'm going to fix it up. I'm going to erase a lot of these lines and draw on windows and doors and stuff, but this is the first step